Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maria Yap, Adobe's Vice President of Digital Imaging. We're excited to have you all here at the American Museum of Natural History. I'm going to be joined tonight by some of the most talented and socially committed photographers working today. We're coming together to discuss the power of photography and the role it is playing in inspiring global change. Many of you have seen Justin Hoffman's arresting image of a seahorse lugging a Q-tip through the ocean. It went viral and spurred important conversations about pollution in our oceans. And I'm sure you've seen this haunting image by Nilüfer Demir. It shows the body of 3-year-old Syrian Alan Kurdi washed up on the shore of Turkey. The image woke the world up to the crisis in Syria and led to hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations to the Swedish Red Cross campaign for Syrian refugees. It is clear to me that photography can do more than spark a conversation. It can inspire real change. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome 4 world-renowned photographers who are dedicated to using their art to drive change. First, please join me in welcoming Annie Griffiths to the stage. Come on up. I can see you. Annie is one of the first female photographers to contribute to National Geographic and has photographed in nearly 150 countries. She is deeply committed to photographing for aid organizations. Annie is the executive director of Ripple Effect Images. Ripple Effect is a collective of photographers who document programs empowering women and girls throughout the developing world, particularly as they deal with the devastating effects of climate change. Now please welcome Carol Guzy. So Carol is a former staff photographer at the Miami Herald and the Washington Post. Carol practices what she calls long-form documentary photography. She spends enough time with her subjects to, in her own words, get beyond the camera. Her work is infused with enormous empathy and reflects the trust her subjects have in her. She has dedicated years to covering Haiti. Her coverage of the 2010 earthquake there won a Pulitzer Prize, one of 4 she has received in her storied career. Our next guest is Colby Brown. Colby is a photographer, photo educator, and author. In 2011, he founded The Giving Lens, an organization that blends photo education with support for various NGOs and causes around the world. The Giving Lens fights for improved education, clean drinking water, species preservation, women's rights, and more. Recently, Colby worked with us at Adobe on projects to showcase the beauty and resilience of the Virgin Islands and to bolster the region's economy. Almost a year after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, we hosted a group of photographers in the Virgin Islands. The goal was to communicate to the world how incredible these islands are and to encourage tourists to visit. Finally, I'm really excited to welcome Myles Loftin. So Myles is a freelance photographer and a junior studying photography at Parsons School of Design. His work explores the Black experience, identity, and representation of marginalized people. As an artist of color, he works to inspire other artists of color to pursue careers in the creative industry. Thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to talk with you this evening. Okay, so let's get started with a question for all of you. You've all produced photography that inspires change. What do you think it is about this medium that causes people to think about their world and take action? Annie, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, I think despite the fact that images can be manipulated, there's still a credibility in a still image. And there's still, you know, the power of something before your eyes that has changed our world for decades. You know, I remember as a kid, the images that changed my life and made me sit up. You know, there's the images from civil rights, the images from the Vietnam War. These, you know, and many, many others inspired action, like really serious action and change. And I feel that, you know, that we are honor-bound to continue that legacy of adding depth and meaning in ways that can be shared broadly. And we've never had a greater opportunity to share and inspire others to action. And to me, there's something very powerful about a still image that you can visit again and again and again, and you can print it out and put it on your wall and remember that, you know, you too should act. We should all be actors in this world of ours.
So it really kind of brought that situation or that experience from someplace else, all around the world, right in front of you, right to your face.
Yep.
Carol, what is it about photography that inspires that sort of change and action?
I think still photographs especially, are truly the universal language, as cliche as that may sound. It's what reaches people on a really visceral, emotional gut level that I think many other mediums don't. And when it resonates in someone's soul and heart, I think that's what probably incrementally creates change, or whether it's massive change or just changing someone's day, enlightening someone about something they didn't know, and there's a ripple effect, actually, that goes on from there. And I think the power of the still photograph is amazing. It always was amazing, and I think it still is profoundly important in today's world.
Yeah. So you don't just shoot obviously you're shooting many images, but oftentimes you prefer to share a series of images, not just a single image. What is it about the difference for you? Is it just that you can't edit yourself down to one image?
Well, there's that, and there's the fact I usually miss the image, the picture. But I've always loved to spend time, and my editors call me obsessive, every editor I've worked with, but, you know, OCD is kind of my blessing and a curse. I think it's the reason that you get stories that have more depth and more intimacy. You're not going to just blast into someone's life and have genuine moments happen. I think you have to give them the time. I mean, give them the time to trust you, for one thing, get beyond the camera, trust you that you genuinely want to tell their story. It's not about you, it's certainly about them. And I think a package of pictures we'll never walk in their shoes, we'll never be able to experience some of the issues that we try to portray in our photographs, but with multiple images, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You can put together a little bit more balanced look at the narrative of whatever that story is. It's kind of like a box of donuts. A dozen's better than one.
You included it.
Sorry,
It's an inside joke.
Private joke.
Well played.
So Colby, what is it about photography for you that you feel makes people really think about their world differently?
Well, I agree with everything that was said so far. I think there's something nostalgic about a photograph that does allow people to feel connected to a moment that they weren't necessarily there before. I'd like to add just that how technology has made photography more affordable and more accessible, as well as post-processing. And when you interweave that with social media, we are now more interconnected than we ever have been before in the history of our species. And that is a powerful, duo together to really, truly affect change. I mean, you can sit there and whether it's with your cell phone or whether it's with a larger camera, take an image, instantly share it onto any social platform. Maybe it gets picked up by news media, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. I mean, this is how we saw what was happening in Tehran with the student, protests that were happening in 2006. I mean, these things are starting to happen more and more, and we're getting to a point where information can't really hide anymore. Content, these stories are getting out there. What we do with those stories is, something I know we're going to talk about tonight that is very interesting, but I think that the visual nature of photography and how social media interweaves with it, I think has really changed the industry. It's changed advertising, marketing, media, and it's a very prolific time to be a photographer these days.
Definitely. Myles, what about you? What do you think about this medium?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone kind of like covered a lot of the stuff I was going to say. But no, I would definitely say that like photography has a great way of connecting you to worlds that are like not within like your normal environment. Say for instance, like me, I'm from Maryland, and looking at photography, I can see images from Africa or Haiti and be tuned into things that are happening outside of like my just general scope of seeing. And just like looking at images, it creates, I feel like, empathy for the person in the photograph. You see this thing going on and you can't ignore it. And so you can either like go on with your day or decide to change something in your world about it. So
definitely.
Yeah.
So what it is about, like, was there a moment for you, Myles, an image or experience that kind of caused you to become a photographer?
Yeah, I guess they're kind of like, it's kind of like a two-part answer. So I guess I first got interested in photography around the time when I was like 13, 14, when I was like about to go to high school. So around like 8th grade, I started using this website called Tumblr because my cousin, she was like, you should make this Tumblr account. And I was like, what is this? And so then I got on it and I just discovered like all of this like whole new world of images. People were doing like fashion photography, food photography, all these really amazing images that I was just like scrolling through. And I found myself wanting to create stuff similar to that. Like I was always interested in art, always doing like creative things like drawing and stuff. And up until that point, I thought that I wanted to be an illustrator. But like once I got onto this website and saw these photographs, I was like, I want to do the same thing. And so I started just hanging out with my cousin who was also into photography at the time. And we would just do like photo shoots at her house or at my house. And then like the real, I feel like, defining moment where I decided like, okay, this is like what I want to continue on and actually pursue as a career was right before I started high school. So that summer, my mom and dad took my sister and I to Italy. So we went to Rome, Venice, and Florence. And we got to borrow my uncle's DSLR. And so that was the first time where I like had full control and was able to like do whatever I wanted. And I basically just like kind of took the camera and like documented the entire trip. And after that trip, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So I begged my parents for a camera that Christmas, and I ended up getting a Canon, which I just sold. My first camera I just sold the other day. And then from then on, that's when I was just like doing photography full time.
Awesome, awesome.
I gotta tell you, to this day, I'm so sad I sold my first camera.
I sold mine too. No! I don't have it.
Yeah, it was kind of a bittersweet moment, but I was like, I can just like give this to someone else, and they'll be able to do so much more than I'm doing with it right now.
Yeah, sure. You're nicer than I am. I need money.
Carol, what about you? What was that first moment for you? Was it when you held a camera for the first time, or?
No, actually in high school I wanted to be an artist, but we were really poor. My dad died when I was 6, and my mother really struggled sewing factories. We didn't even have a bathroom. We had no car. We had an outhouse. And she put in the first bathroom, she scrimped and saved, and it was pink, pink, pink. Everything was pink, the tiles, the curtains, the tub. All I remember is this sea of pink, but she was so proud of it until the day she died. I painted her nails pink, and always reminded me of that bathroom. But anyway, I wanted to be an artist. I thought that was pretty impractical. So I went to nursing school for altruistic reasons. I thought I wanted to help people, but it was far too hands-on, and I thought with all the mistakes I make, I'm going to kill someone. So I have to stay away from people. But an old boyfriend gave me a camera at the time, a real camera. I used to, with an Instamatic, just snap pictures of my dogs and flowers and whatever. And I took a darkroom class, a black and white darkroom class at nursing school, and failed it. But when that first print came up in the tray, it was the most magical, defining moment of my life. I'll never, ever forget that feeling. Even now I get the chills when I think about it. Yeah. I can't remember for the life of me what that photograph was, but I remember that feeling so well. And when I got my RN, it gave me the chance to take a risk and go back to school for photography. Right. Awesome. And nursing, of course. I think anything you do in life is a brick on your journey to wherever you're supposed to be. And I think nursing certainly gave me a foundation of the compassion, the empathy, everything you need in photojournalism to tell people's stories.
Wonderful. Colby, what about you? Was there an image or a moment?
Well, I think for me, well, it's a little bit of twofold. So for me, I think like a lot of people, I grew up, looking at things like National Geographic and getting inspired by the stories that were coming out of there, The image that you guys see up here is a photograph of a silverback gorilla that I took, but that was inspired from probably when I was a kid, looking at the work coming out of like what Diane Fossey was doing, or maybe it was some of the travel work from Steve McCurry, or maybe it was Galen Rowell and some of his landscape work. But the interesting thing is that at the time I had no idea who any of these people were. I never had this nostalgic story where I was handed a camera when I was young and it's what I always wanted to do or something that I thought I might be good at. I played sports my entire life, and it wasn't until I was 17 that I went on a Habitat for Humanity kind of trip down to Costa Rica and kind of fell in love with it. And the funny thing is that the trip was really hard. I mean, we were like building schools and laying cement, and I'm pretty sure I complained the entire time. But 2 or 3 weeks later, I realized that it had changed my mindset. It had changed, what I thought was important. And I learned that I really loved feeling outside my comfort zone. Like that was one of my happiest places to be, in a challenging situation where I didn't speak the language, or I was doing hard work or work that meant something. And that really inspired me to want to travel more. And it was really just that idea of I want to travel was the conduit that allowed me to pick up my first camera ever. And that was, I liked that experience. And I wanted to chase experiences, I think, more so. And I think it's a really interesting question because it gets asked by photographers all the time, right? We always get asked, like, how did you get into it, or what is it about it? But I find that origin point of kind of what gets us into photography dictates a lot of the trajectory of where we go and how we understand or conceptualize the work that we do or the types of stuff that we're interested in. And for me, that's been, it's permeated throughout the entire, my entire career, is that I've always been about documenting experiences and trying to get an emotional reaction out of it. I want people to feel like they're there and feel connected to it. And I feel a lot of that comes down to that obsession with wanting to have more experiences around the world and wanting people to feel uncomfortable sometimes or angry or upset, but I want them to have that emotional reaction.
Awesome. Annie, what was it for you? What was that first moment that caused you to become a photographer?
Well, it's interesting because I was always going to be a writer. It was just from the time I was a little girl. Stories were really important to me, and I was a real late arrival because I didn't get my first camera till I was a junior in college. But I was in the journalism program, and I remember this one day. It was beginning photo. We had to do. I forget what the assignment was. Light. It was light, And I found myself somehow in the fall in Minnesota laying on my belly before sunrise on the St. Paul golf course and waiting for the sun to come through the fog. And it did. And as the sun was fractured by this single tree, I just fell in love with light, with just light. I was also laying on the sprinkler system at the golf course, which promptly went off. But I remember, so I stood up. It's freezing. I'm soaked. I'm muddy. And I had to catch the bus back to campus. And I was ecstatic ecstatically happy. And I literally got on the bus, went back to campus, and changed my major. But what I think, as you said, Colby, we're a product of our time. In my time in college, I was I was fighting for civil rights. I was protesting the war. I was, I was an activist. And all of a sudden, the camera was this passport to recording that and sharing it and helping other people empathize and understand it. It's important. But the first time I started using photography for a broader good was, and some of these pictures are from that, is I just started shooting for Habitat for Humanity. And on the topic of what it means to have just the simple dignity of a home. And it became this launch pad, I think, for what would come later. Because, as when we're young photographers, you're just trying, you're just hoping they don't find out that you can't do this. And I was at National Geographic at age 25.
Right.
So I was for a decade, I was like, if I just keep my head down, and nobody knows that I have no business being here. But after that, then suddenly you realize, whoa, this is a tool. This is a gift that can help others. So, that's the direction my work has gone ever since then.
Yeah. So Myles, from that, what Annie's saying about, you could take your photography in different directions. What caused it for you to then take your photography to start to inspire change?
Yeah. So when I first started photography, shortly after the whole Tumblr realization, I was super into, and still am into, fashion photography, and I was just making images that I thought looked really cool. I was like, oh, this color goes with this, this jacket goes with this thing. And I found that a lot of my stuff just looked great, and it was fine because it was early in me realizing what I wanted to do. But then around my senior year of high school, I became part of this art collective called the Art Ho Collective. And basically what their goal was at the time was to amplify the voices of minority artists. And so a lot of the work that I was seeing, because we went through submissions and stuff, and so I was seeing a lot of work from people who were creating a lot of socially conscious work, and stuff that they were it looked nice, but it also had a really great message behind it. And so being in that community for that period of time, I was inspired to also use my work to talk about the things that I cared about. And I realized that I could use my art to talk about such bigger issues. And so now it's kind of become part of my practice to kind of figure out what can I say through the images that I'm making.
Yeah. What about you, Colby? So what sort of inspired you to start to use your photography, your art, to inspire change?
Well, coming back to my origin point of travel and experiences, is that I learned early on through my travel throughout the globe. I started the first few years of my career in Asia, Southeast Asia particularly, and just realizing the dichotomy and the contrast of what was happening with travelers and photographers and interacting with the local communities. And it hit me really quickly that it was not a two-way street. It was a one-way street where typically the tourists or the travelers or the photographers were getting something out of the exchange, and nothing else was really happening from the local perspective. And that kind of hit home a little bit. I never felt right about it. I thought that there was something missing from the conversation. And the more that I dove into travel photography, the more I found that a lot of photographers, intentionally or not, were treating the experience as kind of dehumanizing in a way. We were treating people in a way where they were photographs and not individuals, not an important story. And we weren't trying to capture an experience. We were just trying to come away with some sense of a trophy. And that also kind of, it didn't feel right. And I wanted to break down those molds. And it was those two ideas or conceptions that ultimately brought me to start The Giving Lens, which is an organization that I began in 2011 that combines the idea of photography and art and finding tangible ways to give back to the local communities, to know where our money is being spent, to affect change and empower local communities rather than create cycles of dependence, and try to break all of these superficial aspects of what happens in whether it's the photography space, the tourism space, or even the humanitarian space, which has its own issues as well.
Yeah.
But it was just seeing these realities out there in the field, and then wanting to do something about it, and not seeing anyone else necessarily stepping up, or at least I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
So I figured if someone's going to do it, it might as well be me.
Wonderful. All right, we'll switch topics a little bit. So we talked a little bit about the rise of smartphones, which means that most people have a camera in their pocket almost all the time. It's easy to capture and share images even during a crisis. After the death of Freddie Gray in police custody in Baltimore, photos of a demonstration from both professional photographers and average citizens went viral. This image was shot by amateur photographer Devin Allen. The photo made it to the cover of Time because Allen's photos were discovered through his Instagram feed. So Colby, you were the one who was mentioning mobile photography. Can you talk a little bit about how smartphone images have changed or have an impact on photography?
Absolutely. Well, I think they've democratized the idea of accessibility to create images in and of themselves. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the photography industry was exponentially smaller, and not everyone had access or could afford the gear or the film or whatever it was. And smartphones has really taken that idea of being able to capture anything happening to you in an instant and connecting it to technology and then giving it to everyone. And to me, again, that's a pretty profound element of what's happening in the photo industry that a lot of people don't talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, oftentimes you hear other photographers talk about kind of the death of photography, or this mentality that it's changing so much, it's never the same. Like, it's such a negative way to look at the reality of what's happening. I mean, we're giving people power to capture their world and share it with everyone else. And we're going to see more of this. You're going to see more more content captured on smartphones and on covers of magazines and in periodicals and all sorts of stuff. And every news organization out there these days are interweaving that into what they're doing because it is so prevalent, and because it's not going back into the bag. It's only going to get more prevalent. And so I think it's really important to focus on just how much that's changed how we understand each other, and hopefully how we can feel more interconnected rather than how we can segregate and separate and feel like we're apart. Like, I feel that the more content that's out there, yes, it gets a little bit confusing, but at the same time, I feel, or I hope, that information or inspiration or whatnot can impact people to feel empathy, as we talked about before, and hopefully make a difference in their lives or the lives of people around them in the very least.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, Carol, what are your thoughts on smartphone photography, and how has it changed storytelling for you?
Well, I think it's dramatically changed our world in general. I think everyone now has a voice, which is, such a positive. We can see what's happening in places that journalists may not be able to get to, and vital information that's really important in places like Syria or wherever. I think it's a double-edged sword. The danger is that people are so inundated with images from everywhere on every platform that they're not sure what's true. And everyone with a cell phone is not necessarily a professional photojournalist who's trying their best to, I think objectivity is a myth, but we totally try our best, I think, to tell something truthfully and accurately and try to portray it as best we can. I think it's a great responsibility that we have. And a lot of the cell phone photos that people are taking as truth were not vetted. There's no editor. There's not a professional sense of being a journalist. So, and I think because of that, it's also hurt many documentary photojournalists. Entire staffs were let go. I mean, it's been very hard for documentary photographers. It's a challenge now to make the pictures that are going to resonate above and deeper than all this noise that people are hearing and seeing on their social media feeds. So, as I always say, you could give me a piano and I'll never make music as many lessons as you give me. You can give anyone a cell phone, but they will not necessarily make a storytelling narrative. Right. Documentary photojournalism. Right. So we have to keep it all in perspective. It's great, and it's got its issues.
Yeah. So Myles, did you ever start shooting with a smartphone when you first started, or how's it?
I shot like I was telling you backstage how when I first started, sometimes I would take my sister's iPod Touch to do self-portraits and stuff. But yeah, smartphone photography, I guess, was never something that kind of was introduced to me. It was kind of something that was always there because smartphones were always there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of such a natural part, I guess, of me documenting my world to just use my iPhone to take pictures of things, just documenting what's going around, things that I find interesting. And I think the fact that it's so prevalent now, that anyone can take pictures, it's really awesome because a lot of times, well, I guess before where there were less access to cameras, other people were telling other people's stories for them. Mm-hmm. And so now people have more agency in being able to communicate their own stories from their own perspectives as opposed to someone writing their story for them. And so I think that's a huge important part of smartphone photography where anyone can tell their story at any time.
Yes.
Well, I think also it's size, you think about how the portability. Carrying our camera equipment, whether we're using SLRs or digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras, and a smartphone, there's a huge difference in size. And so you walk into a place and you have a big camera, just your presence sometimes changes the experience of what you're trying to document. So I find that sometimes it's a necessity to be a little bit more inconspicuous, to leverage a medium like that or a vehicle such as mobile photography to tell a story that is real or candid in a way that you couldn't probably get away with otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's so amazing that you don't know a world without cell phones. back in the day, I have seen so much change in technology. We used to use walkie-talkies, run and try to find whatever, payphone was not broken to be able to call into the office.
The cell phone was this
I don't know, they're huge. Cell phones were
You watch some old sitcoms and stuff, it's
absolutely.
It's incredible.
So let's talk a little bit about social media. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter all play a critical role in spreading these images and sparking conversations about them. This photo of a black rhinoceros shot by South African photographer Brent Sturton went viral because people were horrified by the exploitations of this endangered species. How have you seen social media affect conversations about your own images? Annie, would you like to kick this off?
Sure. I think one of, as our generation, Carol and my generation, and our colleagues watched digital come in, and the jobs we had always known start to go away.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to get a real job.
Yeah.
In photojournalism, it's all contract, like many other careers, not just photography. But I think at the bottom of our hearts, the universal hope for any photojournalist is to be published. Mm-hmm. And the thing I feel so good about is that there have never, ever been more opportunities to publish. And to publish broadly and widely and across lots of different platforms. And that's exciting to me because it allowed, I was one of those lucky kids who landed a primo job at 25 years old, and I will never not be grateful, but for every person like me, there were hundreds of talented people who never ever got published, who could have done the job. And I was keenly aware that part of the reason I got that job is because they needed women. The director of photography was very focused on diversity, and I was one of the lucky beneficiaries. It wasn't that I was just so doggone talented. It was a combination of talent and hard work, and also that vision for diversity, which I have always felt compelled to pay forward. So my favorite thing about social media now, I've never tweeted in my life. There are things I don't get, but I do understand that people can go out and tell important stories, and that they have there is a greater chance that those stories will get seen. And that's thrilling to me.
Yeah.
That is really thrilling because one of the things that I've always been sad about is the media writ large. You know, everybody races to the same story, and that's become worse, not better.
Yeah.
You know, that's become much worse, and my feeling is real news does not break. Real news is much more complex, much more multifaceted, and real news coverage is something that you have to earn through talent, yes, but also the commitment to story, earning it with individuals. I mean, that's something that I wish every photographer could understand from a young age, is that if you really want intimacy, you have to earn intimacy by being intimate. You know, it's not a drive-by profession.
Yeah.
It's a, you know, it's like sit on the floor of the hut, hold the baby when mom's, you know, just like in bed.
Yeah.
And also I'm a firm believer that this new world of publishing allows us to cover success as well as tragedy. Because mainstream media now is very reactionary. And photography for good is a proactive endeavor.
Yeah.
And that to me is thrilling. It's just really exciting.
Wonderful. So Carol, how have you seen social media affect the conversation about one of your images?
Well, initially, I was so excited, actually, about the internet. I thought, here we have a worldwide audience now that that we never had before, and it's probably was the demise of many of our jobs in the end, unfortunately. But it was, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a noise? I mean, if you take pictures to hang on your walls, I mean, that's not what we do as journalists. I mean, you tell a story for people to view and to see, and the more people that you can reach and connect with, I think that's our goal. So social media certainly has that. When I was covering, I initially went to Iraq for an NGO to cover them a medical mission taking care of the refugees, ISIS refugees in all the camps that had been there for some of them had been there for years, and it was heartbreaking. They were lost, forgotten. Talk about mainstream media. When the drama's gone, headlines are gone, bam. I mean, nobody does the follow-up. I struggled with that even when I was working as a staffer, always pushing to try to go back and do the stories that people weren't paying attention to. And now with limited resources, it's even worse. You know, with a lot of newspapers look for quick hits. It has to be a quick hit. You know, throw a picture up, throw a story up, just get as many hits as you can on the web. It doesn't. Right. It's more quantity than quality, which really scares me about how newspapers have evolved. I hope the pendulum is now turning. I've seen a little bit that's been hopeful, but for me, after that, I had been so touched by these people and the fact that they were so amazingly full of grace and warmth, even after they'd lived through such atrocities. I sent myself back to Mosul to cover the battle for liberation from ISIS, and I focused as I have most of my life, on the humanitarian issues, on the civilians caught in the middle, and I just wanted people to see them as individuals, not collateral damage, not numbers. I mean, just really see them. And I think I probably was the first person to photograph one of the ISIS orphans that was pulled from the rubble. The ISIS families, they would blow themselves up, and this little tiny waif named Khadija came into the trauma stabilization point, and the medics, she was calling out for her mother, and she was all burned, and she didn't realize that it was her mother's bomb that had caused these burns, and just broke my heart. And I not only sent it to my agency, but I also posted it because I was so horrified myself, and then the orphans kept pouring in after her, but I posted it on Facebook, and I don't tweet either, Facebook and Instagram, and the reaction was just horror. I'd had so much reaction from so many different people that this was actually happening, and these poor innocent little children knew the meaning of shaheed at such a little age, and they were all, so many of the innocents get caught in the these battles and conflicts. It just rips your heart to shreds. Yeah. So But that picture especially got a lot of attention, as have many. I'm always so humbled and honored when people take the time to send a note, or back in the day, it used to be an actual really handwritten note, and now it's email or whatever, that you've moved them in some way. That picture has moved them, and they've connected, and something's resonated, or they learned something they weren't aware of, and I think that's our greatest riches, that and the relationships that we maintain long after the camera's down.
Especially if it moves them to action.
To action,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's the thing is, there's such a difference between kind of tragedy porn and tragedy that humanizes something and moves people to action.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's, if you love cats, and I mean, it's not like it has to be a global issue.
Yeah.
Photography for good. but I mean, to me, photography for good is look in your own backyard and think about what you care about.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go to Lower Slabovia in order to tell an important story. It can be whatever you care about.
Right.
And wherever you can use what you love doing to maybe move people to a little bit of action, what's more thrilling than that?
Yeah, definitely. Very powerful. So let's talk a little bit more about the challenges to social media. So I'm sure you're familiar with this image of a Honduran toddler crying during a Border Patrol search at the U.S.-Mexico border. It was taken by John Moore for Getty Images. This photo went viral as a symbol of the pain that resulted from separating families at the border. As it turned out, though, the little girl and her mother were not actually separated. When the photographer made that clear, some might argue that the conversation took an unproductive turn. I'd like to ask you, how have you experienced a photo of your own being misinterpreted or misconstrued? Myles, would you like to start? You had a photo that sort of got misinterpreted?
So around, I think it's almost 2 years ago now, I released this project called Hooded, and basically the project was just me trying to rewrite the narrative of like black males in America. Traditionally, like the media representation around like black males is negative, and so I wanted to flip that on its head. So I made these portraits of my friends wearing these vibrant colored hoodies on like bright colored backdrops and stuff. And so when I published the series, it ended up going viral, and a lot of different publications published it. And Facebook was one of the places where like I saw like the images kept popping up a lot. And the Facebook comments, they're usually kind of crazy. Like people say whatever they want. And a lot of people thought that my like project was somehow about queerness or like about somebody being gay or whatever. And although like some of the people who I photographed happened to be queer, like that wasn't really the main focus, and people kind of like focused on that one thing, and we're just talking about that one thing and being negative about it, when they kind of missed the big picture about what I was trying to talk about, and kind of had a closed-minded view. But I feel like you can't really control that type of stuff because everyone has their own personal experience, and that kind of influences how they interpret something. So 3 people could see the same photograph and take away 3 different things because they come from 3 different life experiences. So it's kind of just like a thing that happens, and hopefully the person who sees the image at least gets something from it, and that's all I hope.
Yeah, so did you caption your photo? Were there ways that you could have?
Yeah, so I, most times if there's like some sort of story behind the image, like I explained for this one, I'll include like an artist statement to kind of like provide a little bit more information about the photo, but people don't read sometimes, so you can only control so much of what happens in terms of like how your photograph is interpreted.
Yeah, absolutely. Colby, have you run into a similar situation where some image was sort of misinterpreted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I go to places like Myanmar quite frequently, and in the last year and a half, there's been a lot of talk of what's happened with the Rohingya, and issues with where are they from and who's responsible for them? Or is it the Burmese? Is it, are they Bengalese? Like where are they? What happened with the genocide and the stuff that's happening out there? And so when I share content or images from Myanmar that have nothing necessarily to do with the Rohingya, people can either take those and misconstrue them however they want to. Oftentimes it's saying that I and promoting the idea of traveling to a place that is, promoting the idea of either, systematic genocide or things like that, when the context isn't really part of that. And like Myles, certainly I'm using captions, and you're trying to give as much levity towards the types of the content or the perspective that you're trying to share and the information. But that's a negative thing about the internet, as beautiful as it is that we can share, and we do have this publication that we can reach millions of people. You can't control when stuff is taken or stolen. And so even if we take the time to put captions, to provide context, to give some sense of a purpose behind our work, an image is taken, and then all of a sudden someone else uploads it, and then it has a completely different meaning, like what often happens in these types of stories, which initially launch this type of question. So it's a challenge, to be honest. But I don't know. Again, the door swings both ways, so it's kind of hard. Like, how do you control that? What do you do?
Right.
I don't have an answer.
It's such a huge issue, and so I was at this Teen Vogue Summit a few months ago during the summer, and they were kind of talking about this whole new wave of fake news, where people will post an image, like you were saying, about something that was about one thing, and then say it was about something else.
Oh, right.
And so now it's kind of in the hands of people who are consuming images to kind of just be more smart about how they consume them, and just becoming more aware of being able to read things, using things like reverse Google image search, where you see an image and you're like, this may not, this seems a little sketchy, so let me figure out where it came from.
Yeah.
So just being more responsible about how you consume
But also,
images.
I think don't fight back. You know what I mean? My feeling is, this happened yesterday, where I had covered a program in Cambodia where women had been walking for hours to get clean water for their families. So water's a big issue for my nonprofit. And then some of the things people don't think about is, if you're walking for hours to get water to keep your kids alive, you're never going to bathe. Mm-hmm. And so the dignity of these people gets eroded. Mm-hmm. And so in this program, they had put pumps, and women could actually bathe and shower for the first time. So it's this joyful picture of two women.
Oh, yeah.
In Cambodia, yeah. Uh-huh. And some idiot, so I'm reading through, some idiot starts out with, Cambodia has plenty of rain. Nobody needs water in Cambodia. And it's like, and then on with a bunch of other spewing hatred. And I'm like, I'm not going to answer this person. We just take it down and block it.
Yeah.
Block the person. Don't get into war with these crazies. Yeah. I mean, that's my personal belief. If you guys want to go to war with them, be like, but I think it's also, all I cared about was the dignity of these women.
Yeah.
And this person was like, we got problems in our own country. They got plenty of water, And it's just so ignorant. They just go, but take it down. Yeah. But don't give them.
Don't feed the trolls.
Yeah. Don't feed the what he said.
Yeah. Well, I think
don't feed those trolls donuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. 2 out of 5, you guys. The pressure's on, Colby.
I think it's also important to talk. Just to briefly talk about the notion that this is not something that is. This idea of people taking the idea behind images or the context and using them for their own purposes or relating to them in their own ways has been throughout photography since the beginning. Social media has been the vehicle that allowed it to exponentially grow and exacerbate the situation. But photography for me has always been about, as an artist, as a creative, if you think of the standard story arc where you have, introduction of your main character, you have some sense of, rising tension, sense of setting, you have some sort of, culminating aspect, and then, things, die off and you get your resolution. Yeah. As a photographer, we're in control of the first 3, and that's it ever. Yeah. We're setting the scene, we're providing some context, we're controlling emotion or tension with light and how we place subjects and composition. But at the end of the day, you're putting it in front of other people. Right. And then those people are filling in the rest of the story with how they relate to it and how they can connect to it. Yeah. And so it's social media has made this I don't want to say an issue, this reality more prevalent, but it's been around since the beginning of this art form.
Photography is so subjective. It depends on, everyone's perspective. 10 different people can view the same image from 10 different perspectives. Yeah. So that, again, is a challenge for us to try to portray things as accurately and truthfully as we can, because we're not those people, and it takes a great deal of empathy to try to jump in someone else's skin and tell their story and forget. I mean, don't ever forget that it's not about us, it's about the people in front of the cameras. Yeah. But there are, people misinterpret, or they'll take things completely, they'll go crazy. Like the Haitian earthquake, I was working for the Post at the time, and there was a lot of discussion about one picture I had sent back initially with the editors, and they did talk a lot about, sensitivity and whether we're crossing the line, of taste. But there was a picture of a little girl, a schoolgirl, in her school uniform who had been crushed. The uniform was caked with ash, and it was clearly that little girl, her moment in an instant, her dreams died, her life ended. I mean, a lot of people complained when they ran that picture on the front page, that it was too graphic, it was too this, it was too that. I'm sorry, 300,000 people died. That was their reality. If you have an issue with that picture, perhaps you should have more of an issue with the tragedy that has caused not only so many deaths, but the displacement of so many Haitians from their homes. They lost everything. Get on a plane, donate something, go down there, do something about the problem. Don't blame the photograph.
It's supposed to make you upset. It's supposed to invoke the reaction. That's the whole thing. Like if you're dead inside, if you're not being moved by images like that.
Messenger.
No, absolutely not.
Lovely.
It happens a lot.
Yeah, thank you. So we're about to take a couple questions from the audience. So if you have a question, look for one of the people out there with a microphone. But before we start, though, I have one last question for the panel. So what advice would you give an aspiring photographer who wants to make sure their images have an impact on society? So Myles, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll get started. Sorry, let me make sure the mic is okay. I guess the advice I would give is if you want your images to be impactful, I would say pick something that you're really interested in and something that you're really passionate about. I think if you photograph the things that you love and the things that you're most interested and passionate about, then that energy will translate into your photographs, and people will be able to resonate with that. So just like going with what you feel in your heart to photograph.
Yeah. Annie, what advice would you give an aspiring photographer?
Well, I guess as you approach your career, to flip the dynamic. I think as we're new in any career, you kind of go into that mode of, please hire me, please hire me, please hire me, which is completely understandable. But I think you have greater success if instead you go, if you think about it as, what do I have uniquely? What can I bring to this job, to this story, to this, that will make me stand out from a million other people? And so you turn it into a giving, a giving encounter, not a taking encounter. And I learned that from the director of photography at Geographic when, many years ago, and he used to say, I'm knee-deep in talent and ankle-deep in ideas. He was very grumpy and wonderful, but it was true. It was sort of like, don't go into a publication or any kind of a real assignment type situation just with your stuff you've already done already. Right. Go in and say, hey, I speak German, or my father has this great connection to such and such, or I'm tall, I'm short, whatever you are, use that as something that you can offer. And it just changes everything.
Yeah.
And have ideas.
Yeah. Bring the ideas.
Yeah.
Awesome. Colby, what advice would you give?
I would say, I'm going to cheat a little bit and just give you two quick ones. I'd compound on the idea of passion. Like, the idea of passion projects to me is a wonderful thing. Like, going into, create something that you're passionate about because you put more of yourself into it, because you care more. And passion projects generally don't make you any money. They're not meant to, necessarily even build you fame or anything. They're just something that you love. And the vast majority of people that I know that have been successful in this industry, the ones that have worked for National Geographic, the ones that, a lot of aspiring photographers aspire to be, generally get their careers launched or have historically launched their careers in some form or fashion by having this passion project that really, they did it for all the right reasons, and then the accolades came afterwards. So that's one. And the second part, which is kind of tied to it, is just the notion of failure. And I think in the Western cultural specifically, we have, or we are taught, or we are ingrained, or it's beaten into us, whatever it is, this idea that failure is this negative thing. That you know, to fail means that you yourself are a failure.
Right.
And if you actually look at any of the most successful or prolific photographers or artists, or really anyone in any industry, their success oftentimes is built on a string of failed ideas or failed chances or failed opportunities, but they learn from it. So don't be afraid to fail, because if you learn from those failures, generally that leads to success, or at least you have the opportunity for it. But you know, if you never ask the question, then the answer is always no. And the same thing can be about your career. If you never launch it, you're never going to go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Carol, what advice would you give?
Well, I always stress the word empathy. I can't, it's a small word, but it's huge. And I don't think that you can successfully make compelling images without having that empathy. And I think it's so critical for everyone to check ego at the door. It's not about us making great pictures and about winning awards or all that superficial stuff. It's about the narrative of others. It's really about caring and having the passion for the people or the issues that you're trying to portray to you know, to the viewers, and we're the link that connects, and it's a vital link, but it's also, we're just that. But if we do it from the heart and soul with that kind of passion, with the empathy for who we're photographing, and with hopefully the right, hopefully to promote change, positive change. I mean, I can't even, you know, like I said, objectivity, you know, I don't do this, you know, so just to make beautiful images. I want there to be some kind of difference even in one person's life on that day, on that moment, make them think, whatever. So.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so do we have a couple questions from the audience?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Great panel. I wanted to ask, riffing off of what Carol said about empathy, I think it's the New York Times that coined VR as like the empathy machine. Is there anything about that medium? It's obviously quite different than still photography. There's a lot of control that you have in still photography of cultivating an image, but if you're able to see that image in movement in 360, kind of paints more of a holistic picture. And is there anything that's interesting about that, I guess, to this panel in the future?
So have any of you tried virtual reality?
So I was at this, my mic. I was at this exhibit in Eindhoven, Netherlands, at the Design Academy there, and they had this one exhibit about like VR and pairing it with like storytelling, and I forgot where it was, but it was like you could put on the headset and you could like hear and you could like see everything that was going around you in this particular area where there was an issue happening. And I think it just like amplifies the effects that photography have, where like if you can actually, like photography allows you to see it, but like when it actually seems like you're there, that's like an even more emotional attachment to what's going on. And I feel like would compel you to want to help even more than a photograph would.
Yeah.
I think to compound on that, I think, you know, the fact that it's very immersive is a very positive thing. I think the problem is that you have two technological hurdles to kind of find a way around. The one is accessibility for VR. Now, yes, you can see stuff on, you know, Facebook or, you know, certain platforms that allow you to see a bit of what's happening 360, but actual use cases of how many people actually have VR headsets to truly get the immersive experience becomes problematic, at least on a larger scale. In addition, in terms of actually filming that type of content, you don't, at that stage, as the creator, then have control to help direct the story, direct the viewer. So if I sit there and I'm walking through a village in East Africa and I'm trying to tell an important story about rhino poaching or whatnot, and people are in there and they don't know how to use the VR or whatever happened, they're looking around, like you can't necessarily, it's not as easy to direct people to what you're trying to tell. So I think that there is promise to it, but I think there's a lot of issues that we still have to get around before it becomes something that truly can affect change, at least on a level that I think is meaningful.
Annie, what do you think of that, walking into an image and having it sort of surround you?
Well, I'm so not technical. So, you know, I think it's like any new exciting technology that at first it can be pretty doggone gimmicky, you know, and I mean, you know, you take a look at, well, any technology where suddenly it's self-consciously the technology that matters.
Right.
And then I think artists and real storytellers take that technology and grow beyond it and realize where it's useful and where it's not useful. And I'm all for that. You know, I just am impaired in terms of being, you know, so you know, when I go on an assignment, especially you know, when I cover 8 organizations, I can go for 2 weeks with cameras, clothes, any food I need, like anything I need with carry-on.
Yeah.
And I really like that. So I don't want to. I'm not a good person to ask because I'm not interested in the things that, you know,
would require you to do it.
Bingo. Yeah. It was funny. I had a picture on Instagram this week, and one of the comments it was an aerial of white pelicans in a salt marsh, and this woman said, "Annie, what kind of drone do you use?" And I'm like, I think it was a Cessna 172. You know, I shot it from a plane. You know, but it's that kind of you know, things have changed so dramatically.
Yeah, yeah. Carol, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm technically challenged too, completely. So I set my cameras the same way and never change it. I just want to focus on the moment. But I believe, you know, there's a use, as long as we take, you know, whatever the technology is and use it to advance the storytelling, use it for a different experience to involve people, you know, on a more, you know, deeper level. Yes, why not? I mean, in the hands of a skilled storyteller, I think, you know, any medium, any kind of technology is useful. When I started doing audio, I love galleries we used to put together with still photographs and audio. I found such a power to having the voice of that person tell their own story, or, you know, natural sound. And so I think, you know, as long as it's used well, you know, to tell the story.
It's so true. At Ripple, you know, at my nonprofit, I've never shot video in my life, but I've now produced 32 films. Riddle me that one, you know. But it's by working with people who are master storytellers and know how to take these different technical opportunities, really, and use them, you know, beyond. I mean, it's still storytelling.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still, the goal is the same.
Yeah, there's always that basic foundation that we can't lose touch with by getting all caught up in the gadgets.
Right, the technology, absolutely. Is there another question out there?
Hey, bud.
Hi.
I was curious about when you make the decision to stop shooting. I know especially for most of you, or actually all of you, you're in moments where you're in another person's space.
Oh.
And when you
I
choose
thought you
to...
meant the ones of us that were really old.
No. No.
I'm like, ouch.
When are you going to give up? When is it over?
That's Andre. I can have it removed.
Honestly, they would take me. Am I going to get escorted out? No. No, I was just curious about that because I've always found that to be a delicate balance, and I was curious how you made those decisions. There were photos that you chose not to take at a moment that maybe you regretted later, or photos that you took in a moment and felt like maybe you had violated your subject space or anything like that. So
that is such an important and unanswerable question, because but I think the more you're in challenging situations, the more you know in your gut when to back off, when not to shoot at all, when to go for it. I was in a situation in Israel with a bus bombing, and I spent all afternoon at the home of a Palestinian family, the family of the bus driver who was killed, and I took 2 pictures all afternoon because I knew but my cameras were out. I knew I had to but I never would have gotten to those 2 very important images had I been impatient. You know, had I been like, what, I'm here, God, I've been here for 2 hours, I should be shooting something. Not in that situation. So, I mean, what do you guys, you like go from your gut and your heart out of deep respect for the people you're with.
I think everyone has a line in the sand, you know, honestly, and I agree. I think it comes through experience, and it comes through being in those moments. And there are just times where it feels wrong. Like if you take the photo and you feel bad about it, like that's usually my sign. Like obviously I hope to catch it before that happens, but there's been instances where I've, you know, been in situations. I was in Tacloban, you know, 4 days after Typhoon Yolanda went there because I was working on another project in Thailand and flew over and used connections. And regardless, I got over there, and you know, you're pulling, you see bodies being pulled out of the water and all this other stuff happening, and there's just this moment where you realize that you're there, yes, to tell a story, but at some stage you're kind of crossing some sense of line. At least I feel for the work that I do, and I have the benefit of you know, working for my own publication. So I don't, you know, do stuff, or I don't do much stuff for Nat Geo anymore. I create it for my own platforms or my own, you know, my own publication arms to push stuff out there. So I control all of the facets of that. So maybe that gives me a little bit more control over what I'm trying to deliver, but at the same stage, you know, you just know when it's wrong, and that's not universal, and it's
Carol,
very context
I bet
sensitive.
you've faced it more than as much as anyone I've ever known. I bet you've been in those situations.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it really, it's a gut feeling or a glance or a body language. I always feel that people have the right not to be photographed. If they say no, I respect that. I think, you know, we need to respect people's desires. What drives me crazy is the photo police. People, you have a long relationship with someone you're doing a story on, you're photographing them, and they're tapping you on the shoulder, screaming at you, why are you taking this picture?
I've never had that happen.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Wait a minute, the photo police?
No, I call them the photo police. It's always somebody who has no idea what's going on, who's mad at you that you're taking a picture, and they don't realize that this is a story you've been working on for maybe 2 years, and you have a relationship with I hate that word subject, but
Keyboard warriors there.
Yeah. But there's a lot of times, you know, I still, after a million years in this business, I hesitate picking up the camera to take a picture. I mean, I remember a long time ago, there was it was a daily assignment. There was the reading of the names of the AIDS quilt. It was a public event, and I turned around, and there was a woman in such a private, personal moment that I stood there for a second, and I hesitated picking up the camera to take that picture, and it's almost like I had to force myself to take it, and then I went afterwards to ask her name, and I felt bad about it. I felt like I had invaded her I don't know, her privacy moment, somehow. But I mean, it was in my mind. In her mind, she was so unbelievably excited to have her husband's name in the caption under the picture. She didn't care about the picture of her. She just, and she wrote a beautiful letter to me afterwards. And so sometimes we have to overcome our own, you know, preconceived ideas that they may not like that picture taken, because sometimes it's an honor for them. Like taking pictures at funerals, people have so many different ideas of whether you should or shouldn't photograph, you know, death and, you know, our concept of it. And, you know, to some people it's an honor that you're paying tribute to that person. To other people it's so you really have to go with the flow of
the context of where you're at.
Right.
Myles, have you found that moment yet? Of like when to stop, or even when to take that photo?
Not necessarily. I think like the instances I'm in are like a lot less like demanding or like less stressful than these other the other photographers, but I definitely think that like I agree where like you would probably, I feel like I would know at least like when it's like right to stop.
Yeah.
When am I pushing it too far?
Awesome. Thank you. Wow, this has been a very thought-provoking evening. It went really fast.
Absolutely.
I want to thank our guests, Annie Griffiths, Carol Guzy, Colby Brown, and Myles Loftin. Let's give them applause. Thank you. You've all made such wonderful points that I know I'll be thinking about well past tonight. I also want to thank the American Museum of Natural History. It's gotten a little dark, but it was a beautiful place here. And of course, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. There'll be some drinks, and you can indulge in a little dessert. Good night, everyone.
Donuts in. You got donuts in.
I got the donuts.